Welcome back, friends, fans, and followers. It's Sam Dobrow here, and today I am going to present my black and white portfolio called Scotland, uh, Faith and Fortitude. We'll try to get into it pretty quickly. I've got some really exciting black and white photography to share with you today, and so we'll kick it off and get going. A little bit of background. This group of photography was shot mostly of the of-skye and the Scottish Highlands. I have these in color as well as black and white. They were mastered in color and then turned to black and white. And I have a portfolio book of these prints, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. I'm sitting out here in what I believe is called the Ladies' Castle. It's very close to St. Andrews. It's on the waterfront, and it's a very interesting place to look at some of these old castles that are just sitting there by the ocean. It's kind of an introductory page in my book next to the About Me information. And as you can see, it's kind of chilly. I'm wearing some rather good windbreakers to protect from the mist and the cold wind. And this is the beginning of the book. I call it Window to the World. It's from inside one of the castles. You can see the thickness of the walls and this beautiful view of the Scottish landscape outside. Just an amazing picture with depth of field, texture, and gives you a sense of what it might have been like centuries ago, looking out over the Highlands of Scotland. This is a graveyard, obviously, and there's a beautiful view up above, and I call this mortal influences. Obviously, Scotland has a history of a lot of very brutal fighting between its clans, and these graveyards are very symbolic of the lives lost to these battles, to these wars that they fought. And I particularly like this bird in flight above. It just, to me, gives it a little bit of a sense of freedom, of just flying away from all the turmoil that is below, and the unsettled souls that lost their lives in these battles. This is inside Kilchurn Castle. It's a very interesting perspective of the grounds. This castle is in ruins, but what has been preserved has been preserved very well. Again, I give these images very ominous names to foretell some of the stories of what might have happened in the past. I call this one Untold Forbearance. Obviously, this has been a site of many battles between the clans, and there's a forbearance to be borne by those who lived here. This is a shot approaching Kilchurn Castle, and I've titled this one Instinctive Defiance. This is located on a peninsula with water all the way around it. It's a very long approach to the castle, and certainly it's very well fortified. As anyone would come and approach, they would be seen from quite a distance. And the open spaces, the beautiful skies here, and the history of this castle is quite foretelling. This is a very large panorama. It's 31 by 110 inches, and it's just almost 180-degree panorama. I call this the Call of Destiny. This is in Glencoe, and it's a beautiful area of landscape, but it has a history of enormous battles, and you can just see how the eye carries you way, way off into the distance here. This is a beautiful piece to be mounted on a wall where you could stand back 50, feet, 100 feet, and appreciate it at this perspective, or you could just walk right into it and just see the details of the landscape that would just surround you. As you can see, this is quite a high resolution landscape here. Wherever you look, there's something to be seen, and you can just see how this river just seems to wind endlessly off into the mountains and between the valleys. And this road just seems to be kind of the way to get there today. Goes along the edge of the river, but we know that in the past the river was the main venue and avenue for travel. This is perhaps one of the most well-preserved, well-restored castles that I was able to visit. This is called the Eilean Donan Castle, and it's really sitting out there almost on an island. This long bridge approaches it, and when you go inside, it has been restored with artifacts from the days of the clans that lived here. And as you can see, the walls are extremely strong here. These slit windows were used obviously for defensive purposes. If anyone would approach the castle, they would be able to defend through these slits and make it very difficult for anyone to approach. Again, this bridge over here is a very long bridge. You only see part of it in the frame. But this is a beautiful castle and a beautiful landscape and a beautiful setting. Call this Unforgotten Journey. This is a shot of the Old Man of Storr from a distance. The Old Man of Storr is this rock formation here, and it's quite a challenging hike to get up there. Very steep, not a very good path, and I chose not to take it all the way up as it didn't seem safe at the time I was going. There are many people who did, and it's certainly worth seeing if you get up there. But carrying a heavy tripod camera and backpack, I didn't feel that I had enough balance to scale some of the more difficult parts of the path. What I love about this is the stillness. This was in the morning. I call this profound stillness because there's not really anything moving. There's no ripple on the water. It's just pure stillness. And it's just an amazing reflection of the landscape, the rocks that are weathered and bear evidence to the harsh climate that is seen out here. We even have just a little bit of motion here, just the slightest bit of motion on the water here. But as you can see, it's really a very calm and still day with just a little bit of breeze. This is a view down the river from Eilean Donan Castle, from the castle itself. And I call this Providence. It's a beautiful view, and you can just see the defensive nature of where this was built. It's low tide. When the tide comes in, a lot of this is underwater in shallow grounds, and it gives the castle an immense defensive position by water and by land. This is on the Isle of Skye. It is a scene from an area that's called the Quiraing. The Quiraing almost looks like a half crater, and it's near the town of Staffin. There's a lot of paths that go through here, and people do walk these paths. The one thing I found interesting about Scotland is that they really don't have no trespassing. They have this free to roam law, which allows anyone to walk onto your property. They must close the gate behind and make sure that if you have livestock that they don't escape. But the land is free to roam, and this is an enormous hobby, pastime of the Scottish people, is to go for these long walks. And again, I've called this forgotten pathways because there are pathways here that seem so small, and you can barely see this here, just to give you some sense of scale of the pathway that this person is walking on. Just this small little path here that is forever etched into the edge of this mountainous structure. And you can go from one end to the other, hike all the way around, start in one village and end up in another, crossing through this. I should mention that the grounds here are very, I don't know how to describe it, wet, soggy. The earth structure is very hard rock, and it's covered with probably about 3 to 4 feet of peat moss. And if you step off the pathway that's been worn and cleared by traffic, you could easily sink up to your knee or your hip in peat moss, and it's wet and it forms a suction. One of our photographers stepped off and he got stuck in it, 1 foot in and 1 foot off, and we had to help pull him out because as you try to get out, the water forms around your foot and your leg, and it's like a giant suction. You're on solid ground, but you can't get enough strength to pull yourself out of this. The Scottish people farm the peat, and they will get grants from the government to go and cut away parts of this peat and dry it, and it's used for fuel. It's also very popular in the drying of grain that's used in the Scotch, in the making of Scotch whiskey and the grain that goes into Scotch whiskey. The whiskeys of the islands, what's called the Islay whiskeys, are very heavily peated, very smoky, and it gets its smoke from the peat moss that's used to dry the grain. Again, this is just one fraction of this crater, and you can see out in the distance, there's a little bit of a town, the town of Staffin, just a small village. And you just get a real sense of the wilderness that's out here and the remoteness of living out here. And again, you can just see the road that comes up from Staffin heading up to the observation point on the Quiraing. This is a view of the other direction of the Quiraing. This is just a beautiful panorama. This is 30 inches by 78 inches, and I can tell you that when this is hanging on the wall, it is just one of the most dramatic scenes that you'll ever see. The feeling of open space gives you a sense of what it must have been like when the Vikings arrived here centuries ago, with the sense of, look at this land I have to conquer, and yet the land cannot be conquered because of the harsh weather. And the Scottish people, that their culture that has evolved is a culture of hardy people that have lived off this land and have weathered the storms. To give you a little bit of a sense of scale, as you walk into this picture, it continues to unfold an enormous amount of detail. I'll zoom in here at this car on the road, and as you can see, there's just enormous detail that just pops out as you get closer and closer to this image, so it surrounds you almost as if you were in an IMAX theater. Over here, we have a fellow photographer, and again, standing on the edge of this cliff just gives you a sense of scale of how immense these structures are and how wide open these spaces are. Just amazing. And of course, you've got the clouds blowing over the bluffs. It's a cool mist, and it changes literally by the minute. I love these lakes, the reflectiveness of them. And again, out in the distance, the town of Staffen, the channel between the Isle of Skye and the mainland. Just such a beautiful view, such a beautiful place, and such mood that comes with the weather. The weather's constantly changing here. There's always clouds and just an enormous amount of visual energy to view. This is also another large panorama. It's about 32 by 76. This is a little farther south, um, and it's near the Curran, I think it's called the Curran Mountains. These are very rocky, very steep peaks. It's hard to really show the immensity of it. We drove through there, and it's like, you're driving through just towers of these mountains. They're so steep around you, and the colors and the rockiness of it are immense. And this is a stream that's just running through the plains, and I call this unconscious creation here. And I just want to show you the other photographer that's sitting over here. He's got a view and he's taking this shot, but he's almost inconsequential in the scale of this landscape. And again, being that this is a panorama, a very high resolution panorama, all the details in the landscape just pop out as you walk closer, and you just get sucked into the beauty of the space that surrounds you. Moving on, this is called Fissure. It's kind of a play on words between fishing and a fissure in the rock. I liked this because it just felt to me like Moby Dick, the story of Moby Dick in this stone. It's like this is the boat, and there's just this feeling of the ocean, and this whale could be beneath the surface of this boat. It's kind of a story etched into stone. This is Wistful Voices. Here on the edge of Loch Ness, we have this tree standing alone. Its structure tells us of enduring amazingly powerful winds and weather, but yet it survives. Just like the people of Scotland, it survives in a tough, rugged manner. And as the breeze blows through the leaves, you can hear these wistful voices almost telling you a story from the past. And this is peace. There's been so much war across these channels, so many battles of clans versus clan. And as the sun rises in the morning and it peeks through these clouds, it's just a feeling of calmness and peace, like a feeling after the storm. And the way the mountains on the mainland are silhouetted and the beams of light shining through against the foreground, just such a calming effect to look at and to view, and just to feel this open space and this calmness and this beauty of a sunrise in the morning. To me, this is a biblical image. I call it mystic. And it kind of reminds me of the story of Abraham, where Abraham is taking his son to the altar to sacrifice to God as a showing of his faith. And on the way there, his son asks, "Where is the lamb?" And he says, "God will provide the lamb." And you just feel this sense of um, this biblical story, and you see one uh, of these animals wandering, and the other one is staying behind, and in almost a foretelling, foreboding manner. This small church has a very tragic story behind it. I call this the Unawakened. This was the site of a mass murder when one clan attacked the other. Uh, the McLeods and the McDonalds had a fierce rivalry going on, and they frequently went to each other's villages and murdered and killed each other. And in an act of vengeance, I don't recall which one. I believe this was where the McLeods um, village was. And on a Sunday morning, they were all in this church worshiping, and the McDonald's came across the bay. They locked them in this church, and they burned it to the ground with the entire village inside. There's only one survivor. That survivor was a young girl who managed to get out through the window. She ran to a nearby village of her clan, told them the story. When they heard about it, they amassed uh, their arms and an army to come back. And as they were arriving, the other clan found that their boats had been beached as the tide had left. They were stranded on the shore, and the battle ensued, in which every single one of the perpetrators of that hideous murder were killed, and their bodies were piled up on the beach, and the blood filled the water. And they call that, I believe, the Battle of the Bleeding Dyke, something to that nature, because their bodies were piled so high that they blocked the sea with just blood pouring out. And this church was never rebuilt. It's left as a monument to the history of this battle. This is Echoes of Time. This is like a shipwreck. To me, I can almost feel a sense of disaster that struck this small boat, and it makes you wonder, what happened. Is this just some boat that was left here, or is this the boat that was wrecked? And what happened to the captain and the crew? And it's just kind of something that has a story, and it just needs to be told, but yet we don't know what that story is. I really love the way the ropes work here. The second boat in the background, and of course the few homes and farms in the background. There just seems to be something inside, a story, something inside here, looking out. What must it have been like to be in this kind of a vessel on the seas, the North Sea out there, such a rough and treacherous body of water, to be out in such a small vessel with such inferior construction for something to fight the storms off the North Sea. This is another castle in the Scottish Highlands. It's the castle in Braemar, and the title of this is called Faith and Fortitude. It's the motto of the clan whose home is this castle. And it's an interesting place. It's been fairly restored. The architecture isn't anything really bizarre or unusual, but when you go inside, you get a chance to see what life was like living in the castles. There's a lot of wax figures. There's the clothing, the utensils in the kitchen, all of the artwork and the furniture have all been restored and put in place. And it's a very interesting tour to take, which kind of gives you a view of what life was like back in the days when the clans lived in the castles. This castle is rather famous. It's the castle at St. Andrews, and there's a lot of history in St. Andrews. There's a lot of religious monuments, and there's also the castles of the clans that live there. This castle has been restored quite a bit. There's not much that we saw inside of it, but certainly you get a sense of its presence on the waterfront here. There's a famous battle that took place here as the invading clans tried to find their way in, and they actually started in the bottom part of this castle, tunneling under the castle in order to come up through the courtyard. And during the battle, they discovered that they were tunneling and coming up, so they managed to find where they were going to be coming up and tunneled down. And I believe they threw burning tar and gas and other incendiaries down when they started to break through. So it was not a surprise, but it was a treacherous end to an attempt to attack the castle. I call this Sacred Earth. This is because it's a church, it's a graveyard, and there's so many peoples of Scottish heritage whose ancestors are buried here. And these are inside the walls of the St. Andrew's Cathedral. You can see some of the architecture of the St. Andrew's Cathedral that's still here. And this is really an amazing monument. Just the scale of it is unbelievable. You think about all the effort that went into building these great cathedrals, these great churches, and the centuries that they've endured. And this is just one point where you get to see the beauty of this architecture and the solemnness of the graves out here. I have some other pictures of these twin towers that you'll see a little bit later, but certainly this is a great monument, and you get a chance to see how well these headstones are preserved. The grounds are so well preserved. This is another one of the towers in the cathedral. The church is so powerful and was such a big part of the society there. I call this misgivings of forgiveness, and you can interpret that any way that you want. But I see, this cathedral and what's left of it. You see these massive gates here that are open with a entry through the main doors of the cathedral inside, and you just get a sense of how huge these monuments are. And it just, it's an awe-inspiring moment just to see these structures and just to imagine what it must have been like in their glory days when they were complete structures. This is in the town of St. Andrews. I call this Glint. This is a beautiful stained glass window. I just love the way the sun hits this stained glass and just throws this reflection back at me. It's just a beautiful sight of a very old cathedral, a very old church. And this Gothic architecture is just so amazing. It's just such an amazing piece of architecture. I mean, look at the workmanship, the skill in crafting something so beautiful and so enduring as this. And that is the final image in my portfolio of Scotland, Faith and Fortitude. This is available as a limited edition collection of chromogenic prints. It's bound in a leather binder. Each of the spreads are 12 by 24 inches. They are lay flat spreads, and these are chromogenic prints, which means that they're printed through a light process and a wet development, and they're mounted on sheets of mylar to create a book effect. And the beauty of this is that it's a tabletop exhibition. It's meant to be walked through like you would a gallery exhibit. Each page takes you to a different wall and gives you a sense of what this exhibit would be like if we had the real estate to put these huge prints up on the wall. If you're interested, please go to my website, samdobrowphotography.com, and look under the tab called Books, and you'll see that this is there. There's an animated walkthrough of that. You can see what the pages look like, and I have probably about 15 of these still left that have not been sold, of the 25 that were originally produced. And they're absolutely beautiful collector's items for people that are fans of black and white photography. And these are not inkjet prints. These are true photographic prints put together in a binder format to preserve them and to present them to your fellow photography collectors. I appreciate you tuning in today. It's been a pleasure to share my portfolio with you, and I hope you'll tune back in. I'm doing these portfolio presentations every Wednesday and Saturday at 3 p.m. during Atlanta Celebrates Photography. That's during the month of October. And each presentation has a different portfolio. I've covered many of my surreal photography portfolios up to this point, and now I'm getting into a little bit more of the traditional photography. So please tune back. If you've missed me, check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Sam Dobrow. And you can see the earlier presentations if you missed them. You'll also be able to see this. I do try to edit these and edit them down for time, so you can see a little bit of a condensed version if you come back in about a week. Thanks again, and have a great day. And again, hope to see you next Saturday.